Fast Travels Art Podcast, A Closer Look. Ravenna, on the Adriatic in northern Italy, was a significant administrative capital for the Roman Empire, the Kingdom of the Ostrogoths, and the Byzantine Empire. Modern political developments mostly passed Ravenna by, and so it remains one of the best places to see well-preserved Byzantine art in particular, in grand monuments built by emperors, administrators and bishops. San Vitale, one of the city's principal churches, is celebrated for its mosaic portraits of Emperor Justinian and his fascinating wife Theodora. In this episode, Dr. Nick Gordon talks to art historian Dr. Louise Marshall about how these 6th century portraits came to be in Ravenna, the symbolism embedded in them, and the insights they offer on a powerful but absent Byzantine emperor and empress.
Good morning, and today Dr. Louise Marshall is coming to talk to us about the marvellous mosaics of San Vitale in Ravenna. These splendid Byzantine mosaics are an extraordinary sight to behold, and it's great to have an art historian like Louise come in to help us understand these better. So, Louise.
Thank you, Nick. So Ravenna is today seems a very sort of small and provincial town, a bit of a backwater on the Adriatic coast, but it was in the 5th and 6th centuries the capital of the Roman Empire in the West, and it is today incredible for its collection of early Christian buildings with their decorations that is really unrivaled, that you can't even find in Rome. It is such an incredible site. And San Vitale, this church, 6th century church, is really the creme de la creme of the Ravenna churches. It is just an astonishing church, both for its architecture and for its mosaic decoration. The architecture itself is really based on models from Constantinople, the capital of the Roman Empire in the east, and it is not a kind of normal longitudinal basilican church, but a centralized church. So it's actually an octagon in plan with a kind of double height dome in the center. And so when you come in, it is, this sort of incredible space that just sort of lifts up and light is sort of floods into the church. And then the apse is sort of off at one side. But unfortunately, none of the original decoration from the central part of the church has survived. But the mosaic decoration of the area around the altar, that we would say the presbytery or the sanctuary, has retained its early Christian mosaic decoration intact, and it is this incredible vision. In this period, by now Christianity was the official religion of the Roman Empire, but the building on the outside, it's all made of brick, and it doesn't look that spectacular. It just doesn't have a lot of marble, or it doesn't have any marble on the outside, so it doesn't really look too flashy on the outside. But then when you come in, it's covered in marble and in mosaics. And so, these early Christian churches, there is a very strong contrast between this kind of undistinguished, plain brick exteriors, and then you come inside and it's sort of like all the stops are pulled out, and it's this sort of vision of heaven, because of course the church is considered to be the house of God, and the most holy place in the church is the area around the altar. And that's why the mosaic decoration at San Vitale is so spectacular and lavish, particularly around the altar. And it's a 2-story height, and it's flooded with light, and the mosaics are just dazzling. There's gold everywhere and green. That's the impression that you get when you look at it, because it's sort of landscapes and vines and this sort of peacocks and other animals. It's this incredibly rich, dazzling vision in the sanctuary. And of course, mosaic is a material that catches light. Mosaic is tiny little squares of coloured glass or precious stones that are set into a bed of plaster. And they're not all flat. Each little tesserae is slightly angled. And there are hundreds and hundreds of them, and they've gold in them as well, and so that if you imagine, of course, we see it by electric light now, but we would have been candlelight and oil lamps, and it's sort of flickering on these metallic gold and on the colours of the green and the purple. So it's this incredible vision of the vision of paradise that you get there.
And you can imagine as well that, that because the gold is substantially higher than the viewer, would be a sense of the roof becoming immaterial, kind of opening up like a sky, an infinite space, or a space beyond the infinite. Is there a particular reason why, though, you think the church had so much, given that these are not cheap materials? Is there a reason why so much was invested in this church compared to some of the other churches in the area?
Well, the other churches do have mosaic decoration as well, and would have been as spectacular. I think what is special about San Vitale, it's just, I think some of the others, they're all gold ground. The green of San Vitale is really amazing. This vegetation and the kind of, the use of the landscapes, the figures in the landscapes. The program is all about the subject matter of the mosaics in the sanctuary at San Vitale is all about the Eucharist, the ceremony of the Mass that takes place at the altar. And so, as I said, it's double height. And so it really is, as we were saying, this sort of vision of heaven. And right up the top is the Lamb of God being upheld in the ceiling, in the vault by angels. And then, it's all gold and there's these sort of vines curling around as well. And then you come down and sort of, again, very high above us is the curve of the apse, or the half dome, the semi-dome. And there you see really that the vision of paradise, where you see Christ in heaven against a gold ground, seated on a globe of the world, and he is presenting the martyr's crown to the saint to whom the church is dedicated on one side, and you've got angels on either side of him like an honor guard, and then on the other side is the bishop who started the church, Bishop Ecclesias, and he's presenting a model of the church. So you see this little tiny model. These mosaics were done around 540 to 547. We can be quite precise about the date because we know the empress, as I'll talk about, is there, and she died in 548. So it has to be before her. And it's done at a quite dramatic moment in the city's history when after a period where actually the Roman Empire in the West had fallen, and there were waves of invasions in Italy in this period from the various Gothic tribes. And in the beginning of the 6th century, Italy was actually under the Goths. It wasn't under the Byzantines anymore. There was no more a Roman emperor. You indeed, Ravenna had been the capital of the Ostrogothic king of Italy, Theodoric. So some of these earlier mosaics that we'll see, were at least started, the buildings were started under Theodoric, and there is a baptistry from his period. But so the church was actually begun while, the Goths were in control. But this Emperor Justinian in the mid-6th century launches a reconquest of Italy. And so the mosaics are finished after the Byzantine reconquest of Italy. And so Ravenna now becomes again an imperial capital. And so I think there is this moment of celebrating the reconquest, and that also explains why there are the imperial portraits, these in the side walls. So as we've said, there's there's the Lamb of God up the top, there's Christ and the saint and the bishop presenting the church in the apse, and then down below and on the side walls there's Old Testament scenes that relate to the Eucharist, all in these beautiful green, verdant landscapes. There's the four evangelist writers of the Gospels. But then right down the bottom, the lowest level, on the side walls, are these portraits. On one side of the Emperor Justinian and his attendants, and on the other side, the Empress Theodora, and with her attendants. And they are in these incredible mosaics, rectangles on, as I say, the lowest part of the wall. There is underneath this a marble revetment where would have the throne of the bishop and his clergy. So they would be seated in the curve of the apse, and then right above them on the left and the right are these imperial portraits. And the idea is that the emperor and the empress are there presenting these beautiful golden vessels for the ceremony of the Eucharist to the church. So we see it's a procession in from the edge into the center towards the apse on either side. So on the left, the emperor and his attendants are moving from left to right in towards the center of the apse. And on the right, the empress and her attendants are moving from right to left into the center. And they each carry in their hands, the Emperor Justinian has a giant golden bowl, and the Empress has a large chalice. And in fact, on her robe, the Empress's robe, is a scene of the adoration of the Magi, where the Magi, the kings, come bearing gifts to the Christ child. And so, of course, the Emperor and Empress are presenting themselves like the Magi. They are the kings coming to acknowledge Christ and to bring gifts to Christ, well, to his church. And so it is very much a kind of a statement of imperial power, of course, and it's the Bishop of Ravenna saying, look, I've got the support of the emperor and the empress. And indeed, the bishop is the current bishop, not the same bishop who's presenting the model of the church, but the current bishop when the mosaics were made is shown standing to the right of the Emperor Justinian. So and what is so incredible about these imperial portraits, these scenes, is it's a real sense of confrontation, of you actually, they're looking out at you. Because in both cases, the procession, which is, this kind of linear movement from left to right or right to left, has halted, and they turn out and they look at us. Because they're not shown in profile, going towards the apse. They are shown full face. And so there's this, and particularly you see this in the portrait of Emperor Justinian and with Bishop Maxentius, who is the bishop in power in the 540s. There's a kind of, jostling for precedence in some ways, because who's in the front of the procession? If you think of it as left to right, then on the far left we see the soldiers of the emperor. And then we see the emperor's counselors, and then the emperor is kind of in the center, slightly off center, but in the center. Then there's someone who possibly is the wealthy banker who financed the whole thing. Then there's the bishop, and then there's the two clergy. And they, if you think of it as linear movement from left to right, the clergy are in the front with the holding the Gospels of Christ. So in other words, it's almost like the presence of Christ through the books of life. And we know that they're in front because their feet overlap. And indeed, the hand of the cleric at the far right overlaps the pillar, the pilaster, which is the sort of frame. So they are forward, and they are moving out into our space and towards the altar on the right. But if you look at the kind of the feet and the arms, in another way, because they're all standing and looking out at us, it's like the procession has stopped, and it's really a V with the emperor at the front. And everybody falls in line behind him. It's like an arrow or a V that is projecting out into our space. And the emperor is the center of that, because he's in purple. And of course, purple is the imperial color that is restricted to the emperor because it is a very rare color that is hard to manufacture. As I'm sure you know, it's made from ground up shells of a mollusk that's found, I think it's a mussel or something, is found on the shores of a particular sea, and it's hard to gather, hard to make. So this beautiful sort of purpley, scarlet purple is restricted to the emperor and his entourage. So Justinian is all in purple, and then the two counselors on his left are in white straight robes with these diagonal bands of purple that indicate they're in the service of the emperor. And, the emperor really stands out as the head. And he, of course, has a halo, but he's alive at the time. And it is this use of the halo as the emperor, as the kind of designated ruler of the Christian empire. He's a sacrosanct figure. He rules by divine right, as it were. God has set him in his place. Exactly. Christ is the ruler of the cosmos, and then the emperor is his sort of designated ruler down below. But then in terms of precedence, Justinian is in the forefront, but at the same time, and the archbishop's elbow is behind Justinian. So Justinian overlaps the bishop, but the bishop is actually taller, and his name is the only one who is written above, and his feet kind of seem to be in front of those of the emperor. So, because the other thing is that the emperor and the empress never came to Ravenna. This has the incredible sense that it's done from life, as if Justinian is right there and we are looking at them, and his face is a portrait face, and the bishop Maxentius and the man between them, who might be the financier, they all look like portraits, and they have these incredibly compelling faces with very large eyes, and they stare straight out at us. That one art historian says you have the sense of this slow procession moving forwards, but then right, at a moment they stop, and to a man they all turn and look at us. So there's this real sense of they're there, they're confronting us, they're looking at us. But Justinian never came to Ravenna. And so it's like the image makes the emperor present and really insists that, although in fact the emperor had nothing to do with the building of this church, it was the bishop and the banker who financed it, but it is an imperial building in the sense that, it's in his reign, and it's being done at this incredibly important moment when the imperial forces have taken over again. And, sort of also that, of course, it is possible that there was a portrait or a model sent from Constantinople to Ravenna. And then the empress's one is on the other side, the right-hand wall, and she is accompanied by her ladies-in-waiting. And again, there is this sense that they are moving from the right towards the church, and there are two male attendants on the far side. And her setting is rather different because it seems as if they're coming maybe from the inside of the palace and they're moving through a courtyard, because there is, in fact, a fountain playing in the left-hand corner, and there is a curtain that is hung over the ladies in waiting on the right-hand side, and they're all massed together, like they're coming from an inside space. And then to enhance the status of the empress, she again is wearing purple. She's in the center. She is, I should say, they're both crowned with these very beautiful imperial regalia with long strings of pearls hanging down at either side, framing her face from the crown. And she's standing in front of a niche which is, like an architectural feature of a courtyard, perhaps, like Roman courtyards. If you've been to Pompeii, they would often have water features and niches, etc. So she is framed right in the center of that niche, but she's got her arms out carrying the chalice. And then at the far left, the attendant is pulling back the curtain to indicate that, she's going to move forward as if she's moving forward into the space of the church to bring her gift. So it is, once again, this very compelling portrait of the empress, although, she's not quite, her gaze, you'd have to say, is not as focused. And that, of course, is a certain sort of gendered, the features of the women, they are all much more sort of generalized. They're not as much a portrait faces.
Although their faces are kind of much less portrait-like and more generalized, as you just say, their clothing is much more distinctive.
Yes, that's true. They all have beautiful silks and beautiful patterned gowns. So yes, there is, and with the jewelry, the jeweled collars, the mosaics, it's mainly glass, but there is also some precious stones and even sometimes mother of pearl cut out in shapes. And so, with the jewelry, it's not, sometimes it's sort of cut in the shape of the jewel. So that, yes, the kind of, again, the dazzling quality of the mosaics and the way it catches light. And it's, constantly, because it's not a flat surface, it's always scintillating. It's sort of dazzling. And if you think of the light of candles flickering and oil lamps flickering, really would have been even more spectacular in the original light conditions that we see it. And so yes, her gaze, I think it is a portrait of the empress, and she was meant to be very beautiful, but it's more generalized. And she doesn't look out at us quite as directly. Her gaze is a bit blanker. And again, I think it's sort of like women shouldn't look at men directly. And so really these are quite exceptional. Like we don't have anything else like them in terms of, certainly of the mosaics, but, these representations of the emperor and empress in the space of the church. And so it really makes San Vitale an amazing site and to visit in this period.
It's truly spectacular, and the way you've kind of brought it to life and explained what's going on and what makes it so unique is fabulous as well. Just have a question about, if we know much about contemporary imperial processions. So is this the idea of the procession into the apse is reflecting a contemporary practice back in Constantinople?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are, some scholars think that it is a specific moment in the liturgy called, I think, the Great Offertory or something. Certainly, the participant, the idea that the congregation offers up bread and wine for the Eucharistic ceremony, the sacrament, is a very ancient part of Christianity. It's part of the Christian ritual. So it has been suggested that this is, a kind of evocation of that moment in the Byzantine rituals. But I think that, because she's shown coming from the sort of outdoors, it's more like a palace setting, and then whereas Justinian, it's kind of spaceless, like they're on a green ground and there are, sort of mosaic pilasters at either side that hold up a sort of a roof with these are the tiles seen in perspective on either side. I think my sense is it's less a sort of specific moment in the liturgy. It's certainly drawing on ideas about offering in the liturgy, but it's much more about them sort of making donations to the church. And of course, this idea that they were there, their presences are evoked during the ceremony of the Mass. But it's all, they're sort of eternally there. The image sort of constantly evokes them. So I see it as it's sort of a bit more sort of timeless, but also evoking this triumphal moment of Ravenna, reclaiming Ravenna as an imperial city.
You've been listening to Limelight Arts Travel's podcast, A Closer Look. It was recorded on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land and their elders past and present.